Hi guys, sorry for the delay and we're live. Welcome Antonio and welcome Roberto. And welcome everybody for joining us today for our FinTalk series. On this journey, we'll be featuring trending topics and prominent speakers in our FinTech Bay ecosystem. The speakers today will engage in approximately a 20 or 30 minute live session. And following that, please feel free to submit any questions that you may have in the chat box at the bottom. We hope to get to all your questions, and if we do not, please contact us on info@bahrainfintechbay.com. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Today's session is called, as you might know if you signed up, is called Online Education and Emerging Technologies Post-Covid-19. In this session, we will explore the impact of COVID-19 on traditional education and corporate training, and how organizations can innovate and embrace emerging technologies to stay competitive and relevant in a post-COVID-19 world. Hi everyone, if you're just joining us, I am Susie Zira. I'm Head of Communications and Events at Bahrain FinTech Bay. And I'd like to welcome today our speakers, all the way from the other side of the world compared to Bahrain. We have Roberto Machado, I hope I'm saying your last name correctly, who is the co-founder and CEO of BetaBlocks, which is an enterprise blockchain infrastructure company focusing on identity protection, data sharing, and monetization. BetaBlocks also offers online courses on emerging technologies such as blockchain, AI, IoT, and cloud. Roberto currently is also managing partner of the Market Fit Accelerator, which supports over 150 startups per year. He's an angel investor in California and a former mentor for Google Launchpad in San Francisco. Welcome, Roberto. I'd also like to welcome
Thank you.
Antonio Manueco, who is a managing partner of Blue Beta Group, a co-founder and CTO of BetaBlocks, as well as the co-founder of Winwood Tech, one of the most active Slack communities in Miami. He has spearheaded technical initiatives across startups and enterprises, and his work currently focuses on digital identity across distributed systems. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
I'll let you take over.
Thank you for the invitation. So I think we should start with maybe a quick introduction of ourselves. So I'm trying to do a share screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. All right. So a little bit about our company. BetaBlocks is a technology company building emerging technology infrastructure and knowledge to enable global organizations to innovate. So we have an academy that we teach emerging technologies.
Roberto, I think your the PDF is not showing. It's just your Finder window.
Okay. Let me see. Let me try again.
Yeah, try to see if the PDF comes up.
Okay. Just a second, please. Yeah, I might not be on the presentation mode. Do you want to try, Antonio, on yours? I just sent you on Slack.
Yeah, you need to unshare yours so I can try sharing on mine.
Yeah, just a second.
Here, I'll open up mine. You guys see the screen now?
Yeah, there you go. Looks great.
Perfect. Is Roberto there, or he dropped off? No, I think it dropped off. Okay, so I'll start with this. So BetaBlocks is a company focusing on emerging technologies and online education. So we incorporated about 2 years ago, and really what we focus on is on learning and creating, right? I think this is a cycle in either implementation or in academy where we see a big disconnect between what enterprises and companies do versus what you're actually learning. So you have this kind of disconnect between theoretical and actual practice. So we created BetaBlocks in order to actually be able to bridge that gap. So we focus on emerging technology and infrastructure, and basically empower organizations in order to be able to navigate those fields. So some of the problems with education, obviously, is that a lot of jobs are at risk of being eliminated, right? And that could be through automation, through some of the famous buzzwords as far as like artificial intelligence and this modeling, et cetera, right? So a lot of these jobs are being threatened on the lower side of the spectrum, right? You also have this kind of different mindset with millennials and Generation Z, which are these digital nomads, right? They don't want to be tied to any big corporation. They think the corporations are very evil. So they have this mentality of, I don't want. What was that?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but this sharing of the screen has dropped. If we could, yeah, okay, I think.
Yeah, let me try that again. Okay.
And Antonio's back. Roberto's back. Two Antonios. Okay.
Here, let me try sharing again. Here it is. Okay, so we have a large population of Generation Z that are very skeptical about four-year colleges, right? And you also have a merge here of software engineering, right? This kind of rise of, you don't need to go to school to become a software developer and be able to do these things with all the online resources. So it makes Generation Z and millennials very skeptical about, dumping all this money, getting themselves into debt in order to learn this when all of these resources are online. And of course, the gig economy, right? You have these marketplaces that have popped up over the last 8-9 years of like Uber and Lyft, and you have Instacart for delivering that it's just these one-off jobs that have really expanded that work that threatens also traditional education and four-year degrees, right? And four-year degrees on the lower end, then you have specialization, so you could theoretically be hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and you also have a ton of time that you need to put into your education. Roberto, if you joined us, if you want to jump in on these.
Some of the questions.
Antonio, I think his sound is not.
Yeah, I think his sound is cutting off. Okay, so in terms of some of the trends that we are seeing, as I mentioned, 4 years degree in college is not matching up to what people are expecting in the real world, right? It almost in a lot of different fields, what's happening is that these students are getting into four-year degrees. If they're going into private institutions, they're getting themselves, they're basically drowned in debt. And when they come out of that, the job market is not what they expected, and now they're making close to minimum wage, and a lot of these individuals are not even able to even make ends meet, right? So we just spent 4 years in college, and now I need to basically start from over, right? So it's created this machine of universities really trying to maximize the amount of enrollments for the university, but not really giving a sense of practical knowledge in terms and preparing them for the job markets, right? So also a lot of the things that have been happening is that professors, especially when we're talking about technology, is that professors are really outdated, right? When you have to become a professor for a renowned university, you have to go through a PhD, and it could take anywhere from 6 to 10 years to actually be able to start teaching. Within those 6 to 10 years, the whole technology sector has completely shifted. So there's this disconnect of students that, especially in technology, that can actually have a lot of resources available to them to learn online, and then being taught by a professor that has been out of the field in a practical world for the last 10 years. So you have that disconnect as well. And then you have the balance of students, right? Everyone has different economic situations where some individuals have to make a decision. Do I need to go work? And are the 4 years that I could potentially be working towards my career more valuable than if I spend 4 years studying? And some don't have that decision, where they basically just have to say, I have to do both because I can't make ends meet, but I also need to be able to study and actually practice on my profession. And of course, who will pay for education is very.
Can you hear me now? I just want to add something to Antonio. Can you hear me well now? Perfect. Yeah, sorry about the sound issue. So one of the things about the learning process of professors is, in the old days, you could learn something within those 10, 15 years of education or 20 years of education, and that would last for another 20, 30 years. What happens now is that you have the same amount of study to become a college professor, but you might become outdated within 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. So you have to be always constantly innovating and being exposed to the job market and the corporate world, let's say, right? Especially now with technology embedding in each industry. Even if you talk about the legal industry, there's always technology. Like now there's smart contracts, which is the contract to for lawyers, if-then contract. They use blockchain technology, for example. If you're in the medical field, there is a lot of robots operating and machine learning and so on. So it becomes outdated very fast.
Yeah. And of course, the last problem, which is a major problem here in the US, is the amount of debt, right? We're trillions, a lot of students are trillions of dollars in debt combined for education, that now, of course, you add the pandemic in here, and now you have these massive amounts of student loans that need to be paid back. And these students that just have graduated that have no place in the work field because everyone is laying off, right? So who pays for that education? Really is the government, but then you have interest rates on these students. So the system is now basically imploding with what's happened in this pandemic, and has really exposed it from what we've been seeing a shift over the last decade. So this is something that Gartner publishes every year. It's called the hype cycle, and they basically get all the technologies and kind of the buzzwords, and they put them in this kind of curve, right? And the kind of curve always follows the traditional. I mean, historically, it always follows this graph. Is the innovation trigger? We want to change the world, and this is going to actually be, AI is going to solve all the automation problems in the world. Then everyone builds out that technology about all the potential. So it kind of reaches this peak, right? Of, oh, we have all these expectations and this is what it can do. Then it starts going into what's called the trough of disillusionment. And when technologies end up in this is when people start realizing, well, the technology can't be able to do this. Well, you need other things in order for this technology to do this. So people start getting disillusioned and cutting off the technology or disregarding it. It's not going to change the world. It's not the big thing. Let's move on to the next one. Once that starts to settle, the technologies that are positioned to change the future start getting actually saying, hey, what about these specific parts of this technology that can really help us in doing these other things, right? So for example, one of them is in encryption, right? Everyone knows encryption is important, and encryption in terms of like, oh, quantum mechanics is going to disrupt everything, quantum mechanics, but then now it's also been proven that quantum mechanics will break certain encryption, but not all, right? So now you start seeing, okay, well, why don't we work about quantum mechanics and actually start seeing what other potential it has, and you start getting what's called, enlightened, right? What other things can this technology do without having all the hype and all the noise behind it? And then once you go beyond that, then you have this plateau of productivity, right?
It's very important as well when you're deciding to study some fields of emerging technology to understand where you are in that cycle. Some technologies are a little bit more mature. Let's say AI, they've been out there for a bit of time now, or VR, AR, for example. So it depends on where they are in that cycle. You might choose to learn knowing that it might take you a few years to pick up with that technology and to learn and to be able to execute on it. So think about it when you're planning your career, what courses you're going to be teaching as well. Even inside of the same technology, and you might want to change to the next slide, Antonio. We took the case of blockchain, for example. There's even within a certain technology, there's the Gartner curve for the sub-technology of that technology, for example. So there's use cases within the technology that are more advanced, and some use cases which are more behind. So this is, think of, for example, cannabis, medical cannabis, which is a huge industry globally now. There are some areas such as skincare, for example, which are much more advanced than treating some type of heavy diseases, cancer and so on. So that might be a little bit behind because it requires more clinical researchers, research and trials and so on. So that's important as well. Even within the same technology, you might have a different cycle of development. So this is kind of the slides that we want to put. We don't want to go too much on presentation. We want to be more of a discussion of a panel. Next slide, I think we left our contact information before. If I want to maybe leave it on, Antonio, before we close the presentation, we'll go on the discussion.
And to add a little bit of color there, before we go into more of a interactive session, I think it's important to also know is, for example, like, cryptocurrency, which I'm highlighting here. Where is cryptocurrency today, right? Everyone knew that back in 2016, 2017, when this was exploding, and then, when we had the whole ICO craze, that it was going to change the world, it was going to knock down the central bank, it was going to change all currencies around the world, right? And as that technology started to settle, people started disregarding it because they said, well, it's not going to change the US dollars to the US dollar. The global economy is still going to be maintained that way. So then you have what's called now, okay, well, cryptocurrency is just cryptocurrency, it's fine. But now it's going to start entering a process where it's like, okay, well, it does have a fit. So how do we actually make that? How do we use cryptocurrencies for other use cases and actually find a place in the market? So it's important to look in terms of technology and being able to educate yourself in terms of what needs to happen and how these technologies have this graph in order to position our educational systems and people that want to learn in the right path, and to also understand that whether your goals are to be within 2 to 5 years, whether it's something that you have long term or something that is initial, to kind of look at these technologies in terms of how does it fit your career and where is this technology in a path that can actually set your career up for success.
So with that, Susie, if you want to jump into the question section, Q&A, and
I will definitely, absolutely. So going back to what you were saying a little bit originally, how will universities be affected by digital native generations? And in general, like, where do you see it going ahead in terms of that?
Very good question. I had a conference that I presented at University of Miami last year. There were professors and directors from different universities all over the US, and there was a big debate, like what we do. And I think it's going to be very challenging for traditional four-year colleges, especially in the US and places where it's very expensive to study. Think of something, you live in Kentucky, right? Or Oklahoma, or Montana. Why are you going to pay $200,000 to go to university that it's 20 minutes from your house or 2 hours from your house, when you can maybe for a fraction of it study at Harvard Business Extension? Maybe you're going to pay whatever, $15,000, $20,000, and maybe you can work on those, with more flexibility. Maybe you can work, maybe you can create a company. You're going to have an extra $150,000 left at the end of 4 years. If so is that the best decision? So what people are debating now is, should I invest all this money and time in going to college, or should I create? Let's give an example here. I prefer, and I've decided that with my family, I'm going to give them 4 startups per kids. So every US college on average costs about $200K between room and board and education. Why not, if they want to be entrepreneurs, and there's a good chance that young people will be entrepreneurs and they're still young, I could give them 4 startups for $50K each. And after 4 years, I can guarantee you they might know more than 4 years in college. They're going to know about budget, forecasting, selling, social media, count everything about creating a business. Even if they're not successful in one of the 4 startups, they still have a high chance of getting a job at Google or Apple, Microsoft, whatever they want to go. So again, I'm talking specifically more on the entrepreneurship world, which again, most of the young people want to be entrepreneurs sometime in their life. So it's challenging for schools to be able to balance a huge campus, a very high overhead. It's very similar to retail. So in my opinion, the next cycle of large overhead and this transition between retail and e-commerce is between traditional schools, physical schools, into online schools. So I think they need to reinvent themselves. What has been sustaining the way they've been surviving in the US is because there's a lot of Asian students. If you look at the UC system, University of California system, 50% of the students are they're Asians, they're mostly Indians and Chinese. But US students are questioning if they're going to spend 4 years in college or not. So my take on it is that they're going to adjust their system to be shorter and much more connected to the business world, with part of it online, part of it offline. But definitely there will be a major change in higher education in the US and globally, in my opinion.
We have a question from Ali Mezra, who's online right now. And in general, it's a question, it's a very good question. It actually leads on to an even bigger question. He's asking, how do you see graduate studies such as PhDs and masters? What will they look like in the future? Particularly, he's asking about the research generation and in terms of how it exists in universities today. And in general, I mean, again, and that leads to a big question, what recommendation do you have that someone who wants to engage in this online, education?
I worked for 13 years in a company called Michael Page. It's one of the largest recruiting companies globally from the UK. I was a senior partner for them, senior managing director. So I've gained a lot of experience interviewing. I probably interviewed 4,000 executives in my life. And now working with technology, I see this merger between career and innovation. So I think what's going to happen in the future, this transition between a standalone university going towards some type of research that has to be associated with a company. So I see not as much what you've studied or what kind of degree you have, but more what you have achieved. So the research has to be a lot closer to university. So we see a lot of companies going into universities. MIT has done a great job, Stanford as well. So one of the success of Silicon Valley has to do with Stanford and Berkeley, especially Stanford being so close to the business world. So I think all of this research that we do in college, that if you get your PhD level and you don't want to stay in academia, a lot of the PhD they end up teaching. If you're not working for all those years that you're doing research, it's very hard for you to find a very good job. So I think what has to happen is that PhD has to be for a company or for a specific commercial use case. So that I think you all go into this approximation between business and academia. They have to be closer. That's that's my take on it. I don't know if you want to add anything to it, Antonio.
Yeah, I think in terms of PhD and masters, it depends on a few factors. One of the factors depends on the ambition level of an individual, what they want to do with their careers. The other one is what kind of industry you're going into. There's still companies that just focus on research, right? Like I mentioned earlier, cryptography. Cryptography is an area that you do need to do research, and a lot of it is theoretical. But there's a lot of PhDs that, to me, there's only very few schools in the world that actually have that perfect merger between corporations, meaning the practicality, and theoretical, right? Stanford is one, MIT is one. There's a few universities worldwide that do that. When the universities, and this is university by university, when they don't have a strong relationship to basically be able to research some of these fields that are highly theoretical without being able to actually prove in the real world and start moving towards that, it's a very difficult kind of value add for an individual, right? And a lot of companies, of course, at the end of the day, companies need to breathe and they need to make money and they need to be able to either be funded or generate revenue. So depending on what you want to study and depending on what you want to specialize in, PhD and masters may work. In other fields, they may not work. So, for example, we've worked with computer science majors and masters that have PhD that are not practical in the real world. So when you want to build something, they have no idea how to build it. They just know theoretically what certain things are. So computer software is actually one of these fields that I think the PhD and masters in only very specific few fits. Like, for example, quantum mechanics and cryptography are just two of the ones that pop in my head. Those are areas that are highly needed in terms of PhD and research. Other areas are not so much. So this is one of those things that it's by industry and basically what the individual or what the ambition level of each individual is.
And also, Susie, remember, and the audience, that there's also, to be successful in a business, in a company, there's more than just knowing things technically, right? The theory behind. There's interpersonal skills, there's leadership skills, there's commercial skills, all those things that you need to be able to. You might be a brilliant person, but if you can't go into a boardroom with 20 of the board members or 15 board members, you can't sell your idea and why they should invest in your project, you're not going to get it. Because right after you, there's 15 people fighting for the same project, the same budget, the same position that you're fighting for, same promotion, for example, which might go there and be able to sell the project in a much better way. So again, as Antonio mentioned, depends what you're trying to achieve. But if your goal is to have a corporate career or to be able to be an entrepreneur rather than just be a researcher, it's always good to be closer to the corporate world as well.
Yeah,
there's some great questions coming in.
I just wanted to clarify because Nigel is asking out there. I think in the beginning it was a little bit not clear. Just again, very simply, just tell us what BetaBlocks does, so that we can just be clear. If you could simplify it, because they're not still. We missed the beginning part on what exactly BetaBlocks is. If maybe Antonio, you want to explain once again. I think in the beginning it was a little bit off and on.
Sure. Yeah, we had some technical issues, and yeah. So BetaBlocks, what we've, like I said, right, we have this concept of learn and create, right? So that's been the cycle that we've been doing for a long time. Now, as part of basically the learn, what we've developed is an online we developed an online academy that it's more of an engaged learning, and it's just focused on specific technology verticals, right? So we have AI, we have cybersecurity, we have infrastructure, and we also developed the think about it like your learning management system. So that's something that we built from the ground up. So that's what we do specifically just for education, because of course, as we're creating, which is our second arm, which is consulting, we have some type of we have some blockchain products, and we help enterprises navigate some of these technologies, we need to also be able to educate the executives. So in order to educate the executives and engineers, we drive them to our platform, which is curated for those specific verticals.
And
so make it more
recently, we started training, maybe for the past year and a half, been training startups on how to pitch. So we have a contract with several governments globally on helping them how to pitch, and that's going to go 100% online now. So that we call pitch training. So we work with maybe 200 startups per year. So we help them learn about technology, but also help them pitch the ideas. So if you're doing fundraise, if you're trying to sell your project, we've partnered with a lot of institutions, governments, and startups and accelerators as well. Yeah. Help them, and that's offline and online, going probably 100% online now, where everybody needs to pitch the idea online to somebody, right?
We have so many questions, and I'm trying to go around the board. A lot of people asking about corporate learning and corporate development. I know we had some interesting questions on what can corporations do, and since I think that's, most of them are asking about what is the future of that.
Yeah, so I can give you a little bit of my take on this. I think remote learning and video learning is absolutely atrocious. I don't think it's done in a way that actually engages, and it relies too much on an individual to have the self-control in order for them to learn, right? So you need to have the self-motivation in order to go to a Coursera or a UDX or EDX or one of these companies in order for you to learn. It's not engaging, and it was never built to be an interactive experience, right? But that's because we used it as a supplement instead of a kind of a re-architecting on how people learn. And that's easy because, we have this educational system that is actually based on brick and mortar. These universities need to pay for real estate, they need to pay for professors, everyone needs to come in. And we had this online because it's fancy, is because it's a marketing term, we're online, great. Now that COVID-19 and the pandemic that's going around, this model is completely shifted, and it will never be the same again, because now companies need to innovate and universities need to innovate and say, okay, well, how do we rethink what learning is in terms of an online context where we can't touch you, we can't whiteboard, we can't do these things. Yeah, there's some tools around there, but they're so prehistoric in terms of where we need to be with online learning that I think the next wave is going to be very, very different. What that world looks like, there's only certain things that we can assume, but that world, I think, is archaic in terms of online learning.
Yeah. That's a very good point, Antonio. If I can add anything to it, I think before in the past, a lot of the learning that we got was directly from your boss or from the leadership of the business. So I would join a bank as an intern or analyst, and then I'll learn a lot from my boss and be inspired by my boss and my colleagues and so on. If I'm not happy with my boss, my colleagues, I look for another job. Which is the main reason for job change, career change has always been associated with not cash, not as much compensation, but more leadership and learning from that business. That's changing now that we're remote, that it's a communication a little bit more challenging. I need to be motivated. There's a lot of disturbance from social media, from kids, from family, from other things. So it's becoming very challenging. So and that has to change. So the traditional online education system, where 75 to 80% of the people don't finish their courses, the stats are just crazy, just because there's just too much competition with, again, social media and other things, right? So that has to change. The new model, it's not yet known which direction exactly we're going to go. But one thing that I can see changing is a lot of the learning and education, corporate training, has been geared towards giving information. Little has been given towards the interaction and building something. So I think the future is not what you learned, not what degree you have, but what you have built, what you've achieved. And there's a little bit of the Silicon Valley mentality. I don't care which school you went to. I don't care what's your last name. I care what have you built, what company have you created, what's your success case, And they love failure as well, because at least you tried 3 times. And that the 4th time you learn, and you're going to do better, and hopefully you're going to have an accident and succeed and so on. So I think one of the adaptations the company needs to have is, how can I have that learning being combined with execution? What have you built? What are you doing with that information? I think that has to be a little bit better done, and that's where I think the Coursera's and Lindas of the world have not succeeded yet, is how to combine information, which now is public, it's available, it's everywhere, and it's not the value anymore. Before, the value is on information, it's not anymore. It's what are you achieving with that training, with that information? What are you building? What are you creating? How are you impacting my organization? So I think those KPIs are extremely relevant now.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm seeing all these questions coming in about, will the world go back to classroom trainings after COVID-19? I mean, what do you see the future looking like in terms of where we are going? There's a few questions are like, will we go back to how it used to be? What do you think the future will look like?
I can start.
I think, go for it.
No, just my opinion is that we're in the pendulum. I think we're completely like on site or face to face. Now we're going completely remote. I think we're going to be in between somewhere. The trend for me has no turning back. The trend is every time more online. But we're not going to go into a situation that nobody's going to travel anymore. Nobody's going to go to the office anymore. Nobody's going to have any on-site training. I think we're going to be somewhere in between where there will be some flexibility. There'll be a lot of online stuff. People are investing in online education, first on remote training, remote communication. But again, it's not going to be exactly where we are today, somewhere in between. But if it's half or 30 or 40, we don't know yet. That's my take.
Yeah, I would say.
Sorry, go ahead, Antonio.
No, so I think there's a very important factor here in terms of will it go back to normal, and what that normal is. One of the things that I always think about is how fast do we reach as a global community some form of immunity, right, with a high probability. And depending on that number is where I can tell you if classroom trainings will be back in terms of how much or not at all, right? And that's really also dependent on what next company is going to be able to do what none of the online companies has done, which is able to measure the information or how a student actually retained that information. If that comes before we have some type of vaccine or something that really gives us a high probability of immunity as a global community, then the world will never go back to normal. If that immunity is reached before the next wave of online learning tools, then you will have a higher percentage of in classroom just because technology hasn't caught up. So this is kind of the one factor that will determine how much we will have classroom learning versus not, is the company that really engages and really sets up what online learning should be.
Absolutely. And of course, somebody here who's a part of a learning development team, I guess within that company, they're asking, this is a good question actually, what should we do to start planning for the next wave of changes in the future? Like in terms of keeping the employees engaged, I think that's one of the, and in learning, especially in keeping people engaged learning remotely is a little bit more of a challenge than having it in an actual physical place. What do they're asking for some advice on how they can, keep going, keep them motivated and keep them to implement and reflect back on what they've learned.
And I think this goes back to, I think, what education truly is not just feeding you information, right? Roberto made that very clear. If I give you information, well, are you really learning, right? Like when you define learning? And to me, learning is giving this set of information, how are you able to adapt that information and apply it in a professional field, or apply it to build, or apply it in something other than just regurgitating that information back to me? So in terms of how keeping employees engaged, it goes beyond just the information that you're presenting, right? A lot of companies have these specific templates and the specific positioning of paragraphs and numbers and data in order for information to stick. But how do we actually apply it? So if you want to really think about how to actually make sure that employees are engaged, you need to think about how do we incentivize them to be engaged and how to actually get the feedback loop of how much of that information they were able to hold and how are they able to apply it. It could be with partnerships with local governments. It could be partnerships in specific projects or putting them in specific situations to get that feedback and say, this is the information that we presented. This is what the student has done. Okay, now what do we change in order for us to continue improving on that number? So it's a back and forth in terms of information displayed, how much has been retained, and how is that being adapted, and then having a cycle in order for the content to be better and more engaging to employees.
I'll give an example, Susie. We're in conversation now with one of the largest corporate training companies globally. They have a major issue because they do a lot of events, bringing executives to major places and doing presentations and stuff, as well as training organizations. But then once the training is over, they leave. And then many times, they take students to Silicon Valley and executives to Silicon Valley. They visit Google, they go everywhere, and they come back fascinated. They go back to the business, nothing happens. So we're talking to them, how can you prepare their students? So that involves online education, preparation, so they're more ready for it when they go to Silicon Valley, they go elsewhere. But after that training is over, how engaging these people? What are they building? So we're talking to them how we can help them through Q&A sessions, through hackathons, through but creating something that they can really impact the organization. At the end of the day, professionals, especially young people, they want to feel that they're important to the company. So there's a fact of communication. Of course, you can't just leave the employee alone and expect the employee to find the same information that he or she was finding in the corporate world. But also, how can I create conditions for that person to actually deliver something through project management tools and other systems that I can provide autonomy, measure, and reward, of course, once that's achieved, right? But it's not only giving the information. That's very essential.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have Farid asking as well, basically he's asking about the certificates and, how are we going to shift to you had your degree, you had your accreditation, how are we going to, what are we going to be thinking about, spending 4 years and getting a certificate, and then now it's, you sort of touched on it before, but I think it's a concern for many of the new generation, and some of the ones we have online are asking about what goes with the certification.
So that's a very good question as well. I think the biggest value that we're getting out of our studies nowadays is the network. So why do we still value a lot, for example, Stanford? Stanford, because probably the best students in the world, some of the best students in the world attend Stanford. It's very hard to get in. The level of the people is very good. They're, and you're right in the middle of Silicon Valley. So if you think of a good university, in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and I need to create my business and sell my products, or if I'm a VP of sales for a certain organization, I need to sell to somebody, I need to negotiate with somebody, I need to buy from somebody. I remember my friend from Stanford, who now is a CEO of a certain company. So I think not as much of your degree itself, the paper, but I think it's when that environment that you're going to, what kind of people are going to the same school, what's going to happen to them in 5, 10 years from now. So I imagine, I remember growing up in emerging markets, and most of the students went to American school because they're so expensive and they're so kind of prestigious. I know that most of them now are CEOs of companies. So if you go to an American school as a young boy or young girl, when you grow up, you have a lot more chance of succeeding because your network is very strong. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, again, I'm going back to what am I achieving with that study? Am I building something? Am I doing an internship with a certain company? Am I partnering with organizations to do something? So I wouldn't think as much, and we tend to think of the status of the diploma, especially if it's from England or US or France. I went to Sorbonne, I went to INSEAD, I went to London Business School. I would think of less of that. It's what am I taking out of this? The information again is public. I'm taking a strong network that I'm going to take for life, and I'm taking hopefully some type of work experience that I've gathered through summer jobs, through internships, and other opportunities that I had. Or if I built a prototype in the lab of the school with somebody, and I was able to take that into the market, for example. So things like that I think are very, very important, much more than the piece of paper.
Absolutely.
That's my opinion.
I mean, what about, we talked a lot about students and stuff. What about someone who's an executive and who runs a successful company, and they want to take on something like this? I mean, why should this be relevant to them? To take it further.
Talk about technology.
Yeah. So, I mean, it comes down to executives need to have a finger on the pulse in terms of what can be disruptive for their company or what can continue adding value to the company. As an executive, the worst thing I think you could do is just sit there and just let time pass by, and you're basically perfectly comfortable with whatever and not being able to tell how is my job going to be changing, right? The same thing with all of the car manufacturers, right? In the US, electric is never going to happen. Tesla comes up, now they're building a better battery system. Now all the manufacturers are saying, oh, now I'm behind the ball because now I need to get engineers to work with me, but all the engineers are now at other companies. So I didn't position myself to succeed. And now it's going to take me 5, 10 years to catch up to somebody that just entered the market. And next thing you know, you're wiped off. Same thing that happened to Xerox, same thing that happened to Kodak. Very similar, right? They didn't see the digital side of things. They waited too long, and no longer can you hire the talent. So it's not only longer about education and understanding and getting that information, but it's understanding that this information now also translates into who I need to hire in order for me to get to this specific point, or even explore the options. So that's, I think, the biggest mistake that I see in terms of high-level executives and corporations, that they don't have the vision in terms of how do we actually at least test this and pilot it so we understand what we need to make change. It's not only about them, right? Executives think about just, the good executives think about the team and as an organization. The other executives just say, oh, I just need to get, as long as I know, it's fine. And that's, I think, a flawed methodology.
Yeah.
So I think I have a very strong thought on careers for the future. There'll be a lot of careers in the future. There's no question. It's not going to be only one or two. But the only two careers that are 100% guaranteed in the future, only two, are sales and technology. There's no other. You think of an airplane pilot, there's the autopilot. You think of a lawyer, there will be smart contracts that execute the legal agreement. So doctors, machines will operate you. So, and I prefer to be operated by a machine than a doctor nowadays. The precision of the errors are much smaller with machine. So all these things will change. We just don't know exactly what's going to look like in 10, 20 years from now. It's very easy to take a guess, but it's very easy to be wrong as well. So the only two careers which, in my opinion, will 100% exist, technology and sales, because there'll still be some type of human interaction to sell something, to have a relationship, and every industry will be affected by technology. So if you want to learn something, in my opinion, whatever you do, learn technology, because it's going to affect your business. Either it's going to make your business better, as Antonio said, or it's going to disrupt your business. So this is my suggestion for everybody. It doesn't mean that you're not going to be a doctor, but as well learn how to code basic stuff, because you are going to be operating a machine 5, 10 years from now. So this is my take on if you want to, you're an executive, why you should be.
Yeah, that was my question, is what jobs do you think are the jobs of the future? And you just answered it. Is sales and technology. So that's,
there will be other ones, but those are the ones that I see that it's very hard to not exist. They will exist. The other ones, they'll be very much affected by tech, and we don't know how much is going to be done by humans, how much is going to be done by machines. It's just, we don't know yet.
Absolutely. Well, I think we've answered we answered most of the questions. I don't know if you also as the panelists can see the questions in front of you. I think we answered, most of them. A lot of them asking what it's going to look like in the future, and I think we also covered, most of the details about it. Do you have any last, sort of things that you would like to talk about, to say to the audience? You can see some of the questions coming up as well. Is there any kind of final words, Antonio and Roberto, you'd like to put out there?
Yeah, there's actually there's a question about a master's degree to get a better job and promotion. So I can tell you there's depending on what you're specializing in, it may help you or it may not help you. What I would always tell you is that in computer science, master's degrees with no practical knowledge is becoming useless nowadays. It's just a reality of things. You have all these theory, but then you go into a job that you're going to write software, and you have no idea how to write software. Like that's very permanent in terms of computer science degrees. And it becomes, again, right, I think the focus of this conversation has always been, how do you apply that education? So there could very well be individuals or students that have a master's degree that also have experience that are much more likely to get hired than somebody just with a master's. At the end of the day, there's a rule that they always say that experience trumps all. There's nothing better than experience, and I stick to that. As long as you have the base knowledge to perform that job that you're in. So in terms of masters, I would say take it, think about it in terms of what else. Think about not what you could get out of masters, but what you're giving up for that masters. Because if it's 2-3 years that you can give up that masters and do something else that can put you more ahead in your career, then that might be more beneficial. But if you do the masters, where could you be in 3 years? And that's kind of the way to weigh it out. What am I giving up during this time that I could do to continue growing in my career? And that's really the way that we need to think about, this specialization, masters, PhDs, etc.
My final thought on it is plan your career very well, or your how you train your employees. Build bridges between where they are now and where they want to be in the future. For example, if you work for Disney and you want to move into technology, go into the streaming business of Disney, which is called Disney Plus. From there, for you to go to Netflix, for you to go to Google, it's very easy. But for going from a Disney park into Netflix, it's pretty much impossible. It's just too different of a business. So sometimes you have a bridge. Like I worked, in Michael Page before in executive search. If I want to move into technology, the easiest way for me to do it, if I go through LinkedIn or Monster, which are in the same industry, but already technology companies. So I build a bridge, and that could be applied to the same company as well. So if there's something that you have a passion for, keep in mind that 70% of the people, they want to have a career change. It's statistically, like most of the people are not 100% happy what they're doing. So they want to make some, so if you want to make a career change, rather than not just thinking about the studying, which is a good way to do it, but that's a complement, as Antonio is a complement of what you're doing. So try to, through your organization or through another company, build that, bridge that gap or create a condition for you to be closer to where you want to be. Of course, if you want to go from mining into technology, from mining to banking, it's hard. But if you are in mining, and then maybe in mining, they have an investment arm of that mining company, you're already closer to the financial world. So try to find that space where the jump won't be as big as it is just going from traditional to innovation.
That makes a lot of sense. You've definitely opened up my mind a lot, and I'm sure a lot of thanks from outside saying thank you for arranging this and for being there. And thank you to everyone actually for joining us today. And as you can see, there's a lot organizations that we can do to embrace emerging technologies, to stay relevant in this world and to stay ahead. If you'd like to learn more about BetaBlocks or have any questions for Bahrain FinTech Bay, please, you can contact us on info@bahrainfintechbay.com. And on behalf of Bahrain FinTech Bay and FinTech Consortium, please just stay safe where you are. Happy Eid to those of you ahead. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Antonia, for tonight. For us, I know it's the daytime for you. Like I said, anyone that wants to get in touch with us or with them, please contact us. We'll be happy to relay the questions and get you in touch.
Thank you, and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. Have a
Stay
good
safe.
night.
Stay safe.